It's time to talk Gonzaga basketball.
Get ready.
It's the Spokesman-Review Zags Insiders Podcast.
Here we go.
Well, hello, and welcome back to the Zags Basketball Insiders Podcast. I'm Jim Meehan, Richard Fox back with you as well. Richard's an analyst on the Gonzaga television broadcast for KHQ, SWX, and Root. I've covered the Zags for 15 years, approximately. Christy Burns is back with us. She's helping us put the podcast all together for our listeners. We appreciate that. Well, let's get on with it, Foxy. We'll get to Gonzaga's 1-1 week, but we'll first take a look at the AP poll that came out. Gonzaga dropped 4 spots to number 16. St. Mary's up 3 spots to 15 after beating Gonzaga in overtime on Saturday in Moraga. Gonzaga is number 11 in the net rankings. St. Mary's number 6. They interestingly did not change up or down either team after the outcome of Saturday's game. And then in the bracket projections, the one I looked at this morning was Jerry Palm from CBS Sports. Zags had been a 3. They're down to the 4 line. And the Gales moved up. They are on the same line as the Zags as a 4 seed. So, Richard, just a quick question on what you think. 6 league games left for both teams. What do you think is the ceiling and the floor for both teams in terms of where they could get to on the seed lines with the regular season winding down?
I think that 4 to 6, maybe once you get through the entirety of the conference schedule and you see some of those net wins or that record against the quad 3 and quad 4 side of things kind of increase, and you see the Pac-12 teams start to continue to kind of bank those quad 1 games. Maybe they drop an extra line or two, but that feels about right. Between a 4 and a 6 for both these teams.
Yeah, not too many chances to impress. Probably the selection committee. The Zags and Gales play again on the 25th, and then most likely another meeting in Vegas. They always seem to play down there, so that will be each team's best opportunities. Say Gonzaga wins both and ends up, winning out. I could see them getting back to the 3 line, outside shot at number 2, just because those, Power 5 teams beat up on each other. And, but they don't usually drop too much. Their nets and that stay pretty consistent because they're almost always quad 1s. A loss or 2 more, the Zags are probably down on the 5-6 line, and then it gets real interesting in that first round. But with the parity in college basketball, it's going to be interesting either way. And on the topic of college basketball, there was some chatter again last week about Gonzaga and the Big 12. They've had a couple of discussions, the powers that be in both sides, and it was a topic of conversation on the Big 12 meetings, which were held over the weekend in Dallas. Not an action item, as far as I could tell. If it was, Chris Standiford, the AD, and Thane McCullough, the president, probably would have been in the building to give some info to the Big 12 presidents and ADs. Lots to consider. Gonzaga wants to join in all sports if it were to make a move to any conference. There's the financial picture. Big 12 schools are going to get $31.7 million per year on their new media rights deal. Now, obviously, without football, Gonzaga wouldn't be included to that full share, but there would probably be a pretty fair amount of money coming their way if it happened. Not much rumble came out of the meetings, which was interesting. You'd figure the rumors would be flying, but didn't hear anything. But obviously, there's some level of interest each way. Foxy, what's your take on this? I mean, it's an incredible basketball league. All 10 teams in the Big 12, that's right, 10 teams in the Big 12, are between 8 and 71 in the net. And it's the best conference in the country. They're bringing in Houston, who's number 1 in the net right now, next year. Is this kind of a careful what you wish for type of endeavor if it were to happen? Or is it, hey, line up with the best and see what happens?
I think it's a question of survival. You look at what's going on in the Big 10 and the SEC, they are ahead of schedule, I think, when you could see what the Big 12 is doing. I think the Big 12, and again, this is, my perspective, just, being somebody who's following it avidly, but not in the room or certainly in that field. But it feels like for a while there, the Big 12 is reactionary. Now they're trying to be proactive. Mm-hmm. And with Texas and Oklahoma leaving to go to the SEC, they're obviously bringing in 4 members, including BYU, Houston, is it Central Florida, and
Cincinnati, I believe.
Yeah, Cincinnati. I think they're looking at it like we need to get up to 18 teams. And so, what I've heard and what I've read, I should say, I'm sure you have as well, is they're looking at the Pac-12 and saying Arizona looks awfully good, Arizona State, Colorado, Utah from a geography perspective. That gets us to 16. San Diego State and Gonzaga give us that West Coast. And that president, or rather that commissioner for the Big 12 has been pretty consistent in saying he wants to be across all 4 time zones. Yeah. So I think, from Gonzaga's perspective, I think you don't want the music to stop where the majority of this alignment's occurred, being driven by football. And now with conversations about expanding the NCAA tournament and what does that mean? Are leagues like the WCC, Big Sky, Big West, that are up and down the West Coast, are they still going to have an automatic qualifier? There's just so much unknown. I think you'd rather get ahead of it, get at the table, even if you're not a full-fledged member because you don't have football, you're in the room, you have a voice, you're not waiting to see what happens, you're hopefully having, you've got some ability to try to shape what happens. So, that feels like what's the motivation for Gonzaga. I think there's obviously competitive aspects to it. They want to be in a better conference. They've obviously been a big fish in a smaller pond for a long, long time. That's worked for them, to be fair. They haven't been able to break through and win one, but they've been to 2 of the last 5, I want to say, and we're pretty well poised that COVID year to maybe make a 3rd run to a Final Four. So I don't think you need to throw the baby out with the bathwater, as it were, but it sure feels like there's a lot of momentum, or rather, I should say, a lot of energy being given to this idea. And if I'm Gonzaga, I think if the move is there and I can make it work logistically, and obviously the money needs to work, I think you have to go, even if it's painful, even if maybe the Big 12 isn't the ideal fit from a geographic perspective, style of play perspective. I think I'd rather make the move and control my own destiny than continue to be where I am right now, which is kind of sitting and hoping things work out. Yeah.
There's still probably might get interesting as well. I think the Pac-12 is working on its media rights deal as well. And that could come about here in the next, who knows, today, next week, a month. But I think that's still a possibility as well. Probably a better fit for Gonzaga in terms of the travel schedules would almost align with a WCC travel schedule. But again, lots of issues with that. Washington State, not sure how they'd stand on that. Not sure where the Pac-12 stands in all the realignment. If the Big 12 is trying to pick off a few more schools or not. So we'll have to wait and see. So let's get back to basketball. It's week 3 of our podcast. Week 6 of the WCC season just finished, and that was an interesting couple of games for the Zags. They go 1-1, not the week they were looking for, but not all was lost either. I think in both games, Santa Clara, Zags win that one 88-70 on Thursday. Then they fall to St. Mary's and Moraga. But both games, I thought the Zags played about as complete a first halves as they have all season in both games. The second halves were a little more turbulent, especially St. Mary's. But let's start with Santa Clara. Zags were able to get out and do what they like to do, run, get in transition, capitalize on turnovers, pounded the paint, I thought, again, and hit some threes. Santa Clara did not have many answers, particularly in the paint. I think the Zags were up 19 at the half. What'd you see out of the Zags in that first half, Foxy?
Well, we'll talk about it when we get into the St. Mary's game. I thought in the first half, their defense was about as dialed in as it's been all year. And you've been talking about this now the last couple of weeks, Jim, which is, when they're dialed in on that end of the floor, they may not be quote unquote elite, but they're awfully good. And it feels like they're trying to turn that corner to make that a consistent part of of what they're able to do. But in both games, the second half, things kind of, part of it's just the flow of a game, but particularly against St. Mary's, we saw this a bit against Santa Clara. It just isn't quite as dialed in. It loosens a little bit. But in the first half, I thought what they did defensively was really impressive. Drew, was good, but not, it wasn't great for what he can do. But you just saw, Anton's got this knack where when Drew draws so much attention, he's able to step up, perfect from the field. I thought they shared the ball really well, 20 assists on 35 field goals made. And, look, Justice and Pajemski down in, at Santa Clara had 39, shot the ball fairly effectively, just 26 points at the kennel, but 8 of 26 from the field. I think Gonzaga did a really good job of making their life uncomfortable.
Yeah, that defense was really good. But I thought offensively, the movement, the energy, the sharing it, the cutting, they got easy baskets, they hit threes. That's as good as they've looked offensively, and offense hadn't been the problem. Don't get me wrong, but I thought they were really motivated. It looked like to me to go that game. I don't know if it was because the first one was so close, but they came out with a lot of energy, and I thought the crowd was into it from the jump, which doesn't always happen if it's not one of the bigger games. The second half, the Zags somehow shot 63% from the field and got outscored. That's a statistical oddity. And you saw some of the same issues kind of rear their head with the ball penetration. But still, I think on the whole, I think that, as I've tried to describe it, those baby steps defensively keep happening. If they can stitch it together another 5 minutes here and there, or another 10 minutes in a second half, they become a team that could be very dangerous next month. Let's go on to St. Mary's. That game was just a heck of a game. It was a great first half by the Zags. I don't think they could have followed the game plan much better. I think that was a Brian Michelson game plan set up, but led by as many as 11. They were scoring it pretty good against a team that does not give up points very easily, 57 on the season. And I thought even better than offensively was what they were doing defensively. They kind of controlled that backcourt of Aiden Mahaney and Logan Johnson. Tough shots, contested shots a lot of times. Now, they did miss some open ones, but I thought the Zags, for the most part, kind of did what St. Mary's does. They made them shoot over them. They just tried to be in the right spot, body up, contest. And I thought scored it so well at the other end, which, the Gales don't usually do that. They weren't easy shots, but they were just kind of doing their thing and executing. So I think the only problem I saw in that first half was the lead was just 8. Could have been 12, 13 very easily. And you kind of wondered, can you keep that up in the second half? But recap that first half, Richard. What did your eye catch?
Well, look, Gonzaga, or rather, St. Mary's only got one free throw in that first half. I thought Gonzaga's ability to defend without fouling was really obvious. They were really deliberate about how they were defending, and you just saw guys exaggerating, getting their hands off of them when they were driving. I thought the rotations were really dialed in, and you can tell when a scouting report is being well executed when, with the layman's eye, you look at a guy like Johnson and think, well, they're making a mistake. He's wide open. But what they were, they clearly said, look, we'll let him try to beat us. He shoots 26% from 3. We're going to shore up these other areas, Mahoney in particular. It just felt like they were really connected on that end. And St. Mary's can struggle to score, and we've known that. Part of it is the pace in which they play, but they're not deep. They played 6 guys effectively. They don't score at a high clip. They're relatively efficient scoring the ball, but they just don't score at a ton. But I think what you saw there was, at halftime, to your point, it felt like Gonzaga was in control. It felt like Gonzaga should have been up maybe 14 or 16. But that's the power of being able to defend and to rebound on your defensive glass. And that's really what kept St. Mary's in the game, was just A, the lack of possessions, and B, their ability to defend. just, not letting their offense and struggles on that end impact what they're trying to do defensively. I mean, how often do we see that in basketball generally? But we probably could say that at times this year with this GU team, which is when they've struggled to score, you see that impact them defensively. You can't say that you wouldn't have said that about St. Mary's in that first half.
No. Well, the second half was a whole different story, but not till about the 7-minute mark. Really, the Zags did a great job of kind of fending off. St. Mary's would get within 6 or 5, and Zags would answer. It got to maybe 7 minutes or so. Zags were up 8, and that's when Logan Johnson kind of finally found his offensive game. I think he had 10 points in the second half, and then he fouled out, which I thought after he fouled out and the way Meehan had been held in check, I didn't count it as a W in the win column, but it sure looked like it was going to be tough to catch Gonzaga. And then Meehan decided to just kind of go otherworldly. And I mean, he was hitting some shots that you wouldn't even try and horse against your best buddy. But, and he played a long time with 4 fouls too. That was interesting. And he managed to stay on the floor throughout into the overtime period. He was responsible for 19 of 21 points over a stretch, end of regulation and into overtime. Hard to believe. He scored 16 points in that time frame, had 3 assists, I want to say, all the big ones. It was only 3 in the game. Kid was unreal. You have to give him credit. Didn't see it coming after what we'd watched in the first 33 minutes, but he's done that before. Big bucket against BYU to win it after he struggled most of the night. Big 3 against USF after he struggled most of the night. Of course, afterwards, the armchair coaches on Twitter were enraged, as you might expect. And I think probably the biggest question they had was, should Hunter Salas have gotten some time on him in the closing stretch or maybe even whatever defensive adjustments. Foxy, when a kid gets going like that, and the Zags did try maybe 3-4 different defenders, including Watson, on him, and he just must be seeing a bucket the size of a bathtub. I don't know what you can do, but should they have tried anything differently, or what do you do in that situation when a guy's just hit that zone?
Yeah, I love that perspective. Like, the guy who wasn't playing for whatever reason, the coaches decided if he'd been in the game, he would not have hit those shots. I mean, we all watched him hit the same shots. I think it didn't matter. The level of difficulty on those drives and finishing off the wrong foot, left hand, high out the glass, over, if not Watson, multiple defenders. I mean, as we say all the time, those other guys are on scholarship too. And sometimes the guy's just better than you in a game, in the moment, whatever it might be. And I just thought he was the best player on the floor the last 5-6 minutes, and then in overtime, and that happens. I didn't think Gonzaga's defense broke down where he was getting uncontested looks, easy drives to the rim, easy passes into the low block. I mean, everything he was doing was difficult, and he made those shots. I think that's one of those games where I think you're flying home and you're disappointed, and you certainly feel like you should have won the game. You were in control of it for the most part, but then you watch the tape and you say, look, sometimes a guy goes off. And going back to the LMU game with Shelton, it was different. It felt like Gonzaga made some mistakes in that game. They weren't able to control, the matchup defensively to the same degree. This wasn't Timmy trying to stop Mahoney. I mean, Watson's your best defender, has been all year. You had the matchup you wanted on a couple of those drives, and you just happened to knock him down. Yeah. So, I would imagine if they play again and they're in the exact same situation where Johnson and Saxon are out, they'd probably just double them on any pick and roll and make him give it up. But it's a whole lot easier to say that in hindsight. And if you do that, you're going to, your defense is obviously compromised on the back end. And I'm not sure this is the group that I'd want that to happen. I don't have Chet Holmgren back there to clean things up to the same level of the previous year. So that's a long way of saying it's certainly, I think, a game Gonzaga's, going to look back on and think they probably should have won. But sometimes you just tip your hat to a guy, and there's a reason he's an all-league guy.
Yeah. And the other thing you have to consider is whoever the primary defender is on him, whether it's Nolan or Malachi or Strother, whoever it was, they were switching on the ball screen. And in several cases, it was Anton, as you mentioned. So whoever the primary defender was, they were often guarding a big after that. At that point, Meehan was smart enough to keep the distance. And really, the key play, I thought Julian Strahler was going to be the hero again, just like he was at BYU with that late three. Hit a couple of beautiful floaters. His float game is getting better and better. Both of them put the Zags up by 2, and then the very end, Meehan, I think, had Malachi on him, drove the left side of the lane. Anton came out, just a brief hedge, to kind of stop the drive. And although Malachi was in okay position, and the kid instinctively, I guess, just pivoted the other direction. Saxon went to the kind of the right side of the paint. Anton's recovering, but he just threads a bounce pass in there, bad angle, really.
Yeah.
And about 2 centimeters from Anton getting a hand on it, gets through, layup, and on to overtime. I mean, those are the kind of plays the kid was making. Not the highest percentage sometimes. I mean, he banked in a 3. He's not trying to bank in a 3 in overtime. But you're right, you tip your hat. And that game was so good that Randy Bennett, who has had a few famous walk-by handshakes on Mark Few at the end of games, just kind of zips through the handshake line. He approached Mark, and I think if I read it right, or read lips right, he said, "What a great game," to Mark, who kind of smiled and hit him on the chest like he does with his players when he subs them in and out. I mean, that's how good that game was. Outcome, win or loss, those two teams, when they're playing well, it's pretty high-level stuff.
Yeah, it was a great game. And I think I think he quoted Mark just effectively saying the same thing after the game. It's one of those games, someone's got to lose, and, you're on the road. I can't wait. No, we're all excited to see what that looks like up here in Spokane. And to your point earlier, Jim, there's not a lot of these left where, look, St. Mary's is a bona fide tournament team, a team that none of us who follow the league or follow college basketball are going to be surprised to be seen in the Sweet 16.
No.
I don't think we're saying that about anybody else in the conference. So, just to have those experiences as a team deeper into the season, we've seen in years past Gonzaga get in the tournament without any real challenges, and it feels like they get beat up a bit to start the tournament, trying to get those legs back under them, these competitive games, 40-minute games. So I think this stuff's invaluable. You look at what they've done throughout the year. They've got another opportunity up in Spokane in a couple of weeks, and to your point, more than likely in a conference tournament. I just don't think that there's no disappointment in losing at St. Mary's. I just think it's a bit magnified because of the loss at home against LMU, and you realize now I'm down 2 to the Gales. So even if I beat them at home, if we take care of business, they're in control of the league. When's the last time we can say that Gonzaga's been in this position? I think that's part of the shock of the loss, is all of a sudden this run of winning the league outright, or at least having a share of it, is in real jeopardy. And I can't really remember. I'd have to think about the last time that was the case.
Yeah, no, it's been a long time. Roles kind of reversed. Now the Gales are in control. Let's see it the next couple of weeks. But I think you're right. Nobody's going to want to face St. Mary's in the tournament, the NCAA tournament. Just that style of play is like a trip to the dentist for a root canal for an opponent. Just they grind on you. And then in the Zags, if that defense continues to just make marginal steps forward, same deal, because they can score it, and they're going to be a problem matchup if that defense catches up a little bit. So let's move on. Big week ahead. 2 home games, no road trips, no planes for me, Foxy. I'm really happy about that. With this split weeks we've been dealing with, 1 home, 1 away. Seems like we've been on the road every weekend for at least 1 game. But home for San Francisco on Thursday. Visit to the kennel as a member of the WCC. before they joined the Big 12. Let's start with San Francisco. Although both teams gave Gonzaga fits the first time around, that was the Rozier Bolton game, if I remember right. He kind of took over down the stretch and got a putback and fouled that drew a foul that ended up giving Gonzaga a victory on the road, hard fought. Dons have been kind of an enigma, hard to read. They beat some good teams. They beat BYU, they beat LMU, but they had a rough week last week. They had St. Mary's down with 5-6 minutes left, ended up losing by 9. Then they lost by 13 to Santa Clara. This is a team that's pretty reliant on the 3 ball, have been for years, and defense has been hit or miss. Some nights giving up 80, 85. And what really kind of makes them go a little bit is when they hit the 3 and when they get a little production out of their inside guys. What do you see the Dons doing differently? I'm sure, like anyone else, they tweaked that game plan coming in for Thursday. What do you see with that matchup with Gonzaga? Where do the Dons make some alterations?
Well, if I've asked Kyle Bankhead this, but he won't tell me. I thought they pitched a perfect game down in San Francisco until about the last 4 minutes, and that's when you're trying to pull off that kind of upset, because San Francisco is just not at the level of St. Mary's or LMU. You can't make some of the mistakes they made, which is just small breakdowns of what they were trying to do with their coverages defensively. And then Bolton was the guy who just made it hurt, knocked down shots. They went under screens when they shouldn't have. The way that they were hedging on those ball screens was incorrect. But I thought what they did with Timmy was the first time in a long time, maybe even since the last St. Mary's game in conference, where a team was really able to bother him and shut him down with their scheme, despite maybe not having the athletes that you'd expect to be able to bother him. If I'm San Francisco, I'm going to try to incorporate a lot of that. As good as some of these other guys can be on any given night for Gonzaga, it's still about Drew. You don't want to let him get going, but I would expect them to certainly change up how they defend him. They had a lot of guards doubling down on him on his catches. I'd be interested to see if they start throwing more of a big-to-big screen. But then you think about Watson's ability to hurt you, and he did that against San Francisco when you give as much attention to Drew. So, I think for San Francisco, they've got to find some consistency. Since they lost to Gonzaga, to your point, they've had some good wins. But then they had some of these head-scratching losses. They just really struggle to be consistent. But they've got 2 guards in Roberts and Shabazz who can get going. I believe this is Shabazz last chance to play up at the Kennel. You'd expect him to play well and be up for that. So, for GU, Jim, to me, I think it's about the defense. They just, St. Mary's game aside, they score well enough. I'm not really worried about that. How do they guard? They've allowed 1 point per possession in 4 of the last 5 games and 7 of the 10 WCC games this year. Good. And to your point, I think they've had stretches that are better, but at some point we need to see that go from a half to 30 minutes, 32, 35. And I think that'll be the difference. And then we're not really worried about what San Francisco is doing, because they just don't have the talent and the horsepower to really compete with GU.
Yeah, he mentioned that with Kyle Bankhead's the former Zag player. He's an assistant at San Fran, and he had the scout for GU. That you're right. That scout was great, and how they handled Timmy. Excuse me. And then it was very similar to the Zag game the other night. They kind of did what they wanted to do for 35 minutes, and it kind of unwound, or they were undone at the end. But Kyle did do a nice job with that scout. I'm sure I'll have it again. You've got BYU coming in on Saturday. This team is different too. They did hit 13 threes on GU, but the Zags won that game, came from 10 down late to win it. It was kind of looking against all odds at one point there, but they came back and got it done. Zags really controlled the glass in that game. I think they won by 17 on the boards. Some balanced scoring, but BYU is more defensive driven this year. They do have an ability to guard better than most of their teams, and probably not the firepower offensively in past years. A team that gave Gonzaga fits down there. Do you see it unfolding similar up here, or have the Zags maybe gotten a little better defensively? Home court shots go in that maybe rattle out on the road. How do you see this matchup on Saturday?
Well, I think it's hard to bottle up that effort at home and just say we're going to take that up to Spokane. Your best shot to pull the upset is obviously going to be at home, and I'm not one to feel sorry for BYU very often, but certainly they've had a rough stretch here with the 1-point loss to Gonzaga and then 1-point loss to St. Mary's at home. Certainly their season would look a little different if they'd be able to pull both of those out. I just question BYU's ability to on the aggregate across their roster shoot it well enough. They don't have great size. I mean, they've got some strength inside. Is it Trory? I can never pronounce his name. He's had some moments against Gonzaga, but my instinct, Jim, is to say, I just don't see that one being much of a game up at the Kennel. If Gonzaga just, is able to defend, control the glass, and they're going to shoot it better at home than they did down in Provo. And BYU's got to shoot it well enough up in Spokane. They shoot 33%, 34% from three. They're going to need a big night. I'm sure they have that.
Yeah. Well, that's going to do it for this week's episode. We'll be back next Monday. You can catch us on Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts. Maybe the easiest way is at spokesman.com, our website. You click on the Zags icon. You can find our podcasts, all of them up to this point. So tune in. We appreciate you listening. We'll be back next week with another Zags Basketball Insiders podcast.